The heavy bag jumped on its chain like something alive. One punch. That's all she threw. And the crack of it rolled across the gym and came back off the mirrors, twice as loud. And 30 people sitting on the mat flinched at exactly the same moment without meaning to. She knew. She always knew. In the far corner, past the equipment racks, past the place where the light buzzed, and nobody had bothered to fix it, a young man was throwing punches at the air. Alone, quiet. Not asking for anything. She noticed him anyway. And in the back of the room, holding a trash bag, a man in work clothes watched what happened next without moving, without speaking. The kind of still that isn't stillness at all, the kind that has weight behind it. History behind it. A door behind it that hadn't been opened in 9 years. She laughed. The room laughed with her. The man in the work clothes said one word, and the room stopped. The heavy bag didn't move like a bag. It moved like a car had hit it. One punch. That's all Jennifer Williams threw. And the chain screamed, and the whole room flinched, and 30 people sitting on the mat pulled their shoulders in at exactly the same time without knowing they were doing it. Jennifer knew. She always knew. Again. She hit it again. Harder. The chain didn't just scream this time, it complained. Deep and metallic. The way old things complain when they're reminded what force actually feels like. A kid in the front row breathed out something low and reverent under his breath. Jennifer caught it without looking. Filed it. Good. That sound. That tiny involuntary sound. That was the whole point. She was 32 years old. 5'8", 138 pounds of trained, specific, deliberate muscle. She wore it the way some people wear expensive clothes, not showing off exactly. More like a reminder. More like a fact, stated calmly, in a room full of people who needed to hear it again. National kickboxing champion. 2 years running. Black belt in 3 disciplines. Her face was on the banner outside the building. On the website. On the flyers stapled to every telephone pole. In a 2-mile stretch of Portland, Oregon, which meant her face had been rained on roughly 400 times since August, but still somehow looked better than most people's faces in real life. When new students signed up at Iron Ridge Martial Arts, they signed up for her. They said the name of the gym, but they meant her. She knew that too, you see that? She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. The acoustics of the space did the work, the high ceiling. The hard floors, the mirrors along the east wall that bounced everything back twice. That's what 15 years looks like. Not talent, not a gift, not something you're born with. She swept her eyes across the room. 30 faces, 30 different expressions of the same basic thing. The particular look people get when they're watching someone do something they privately believe they could never do. Discipline. Every single morning when the world is still dark, you want to hit like that, you earn it. There is no other way. Ryan Robinson started clapping first. He always started clapping first. 19 years old, built like someone had stacked river stones in a person shape, following Jennifer around the gym, the way golden retrievers follow their owners into rooms they weren't invited into. He believed in her the way young people believe in things they haven't been disappointed by yet. Pure, uncomplicated, slightly exhausting. That's why you're the best, Ryan said. Not to anyone in particular. To the room. Jennifer let the smile happen. The one that had sold 1,000 memberships. The one she'd practiced without meaning to, until it became completely natural and completely calculated at the same time. In this room, she said, and she turned to face all of them at once, there are 2 kinds of people, the ones who prove it. She pointed at the bag, still swinging slightly on its chain, and everybody else. Which is when she made the mistake. Not that she knew it yet. In the moment, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like the natural next beat. She was looking for where to point the energy in the room. The way you look for where to aim a light. And her eyes traveled to the far corner, past grass, the equipment racks, and the water fountain, and the corner where the light was slightly dimmer, because the bulb had been buzzing for 3 weeks and hadn't been replaced yet, and there was a kid back there, a young man. Maybe 18. Maybe right at 18. The way some people are still carrying the angles of what they're going to look like when they're 30. Not quite there yet. He was throwing punches at the air, alone, focused in that particular way, where you're pretending. You're not doing anything while very obviously doing it. Elbow out. Feet flat, all arm, no hip. The kind of punch that would tap you on the shoulder and apologize immediately after. Jennifer Williams had never once in her career walked past an easy target. Hey, her voice carried across the whole gym like it had somewhere specific to be. What are you doing back there? He froze. 30 heads turned at once, that uniform swivel like a flock of birds. Changing direction. He dropped his hands. The specific gesture of someone who'd just been caught doing something they thought was private. Nothing. Sorry. No. Come here. She was already smiling. Not the membership smile. The other one. The one that knew an easy laugh was coming. Come out here. Let me see it. He's fine where he is. The voice came from the edge of the mat. Flat. Mild. Carrying the particular weight of someone who doesn't raise their volume because they've learned volume isn't required. Jennifer turned. The man standing at the edge of the mat was holding a fresh trash bag and had the look of someone who'd just come from doing something practical in a back room. Work clothes, dark blue, the kind that don't show grease stains easily. A ball cap with the brim gone soft from being handled too much. Work boots with water on them. Not young, not old. Somewhere in the middle where life has done enough work on a face to make it interesting and quiet at the same time. She'd seen him before. Technically, he'd been in the periphery of the gym for 8 months, part of the furniture, the way useful things become invisible when they work consistently without complaint. She knew in some abstract sense that there was a maintenance man. She hadn't, until this moment, ever looked directly at him. Relax. She put her hands up, the generous gesture, the peace offering that isn't quite a peace offering. I'm just having a little fun. Come on, kid. Show me a punch, a real one. And the young man, because he was 18 and because 18-year-olds have that particular terrible bravery that comes from caring too much what the world thinks of them, stepped out onto the mat. Jennifer gave him room, made a show of it. The performer's instinct: give the audience a stage. Give them something to watch. All right, show me a punch. Don't be shy. He threw a punch. It was exactly the punch she'd seen from across the room. Elbow out, feet flat. No weight transfer, no rotation, no understanding yet of how force travels through a body when a body knows what it's doing. The kind of punch that had clearly never been thrown at anything real and knew it. Jennifer put her hands on her knees. She laughed. Not a small laugh, not a polite laugh. The real thing, the one that comes from the belly, genuine in its way, which made it worse. Oh, buddy. She straightened up, wiping something from the corner of her eye that might have been actual tears. Oh, no, 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 no. The students laughed with her. Because that's what students do. Because the person at the front of the room was laughing, and laughing is contagious. And not everyone in that room was thinking about the 18-year-old with the red ears right now. Not everyone was watching his face. Mark Anderson was. That is not a punch, Jennifer said, and her voice had climbed into performance register now. The volume of someone playing to the back row. That is a wave. You throw a punch like someone who has never in his life had a reason. 2. She turned to the room, arms wide. Am I wrong? Tell me I'm wrong. You're not wrong, Ryan called, genuinely delighted. The delivery of someone who had no idea he was causing harm because he'd never once in his 19 years had to consider what the back of the room felt like. The young man looked at the floor. His ears had gone from pink to the particular deep red that only happens when humiliation runs all the way from the chest to the surface. Mark set the trash bag down. He didn't say anything yet. He took one step forward. Put himself slightly between the room and his brother, not dramatically, not with any performance attached to it, just a small repositioning, a shift of weight, an adjustment of angle. The kind of movement that in a different context would be invisible and, in this context, somehow was not. A smarter person than Jennifer Williams would have noticed it. The complete absence of hurry in it, the way the step landed without sound on the mat. Jennifer did not notice. Jennifer was on a roll. Whose kid is this? She scanned the mats, with the casual authority of someone taking inventory in their own house. Someone's got to claim him. He's mine. Jennifer's eyes landed on Mark and took their time. That deliberate kind of looking that is designed to be seen happening, designed to communicate something about who is more worth looking at. From the ball cap down, the faded work clothes to the boots, with the matte water on them. She let the silence stretch because she'd learned a long time ago that silence does the work cheaper than words. Oh, a beat, you're the dad, another beat. And then, to the room rather than to him, the words placed carefully to land on everyone at once. The maintenance man's the one. Okay. That explains it. The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. And every laugh landed somewhere specific, landed in the space between a young man standing on a mat with nowhere to look and the 30 people who'd just decided not to look away. Listen. Jennifer spread her hands. The gesture of someone being generous with something they're not actually giving away. No offense, okay? Some people fight, some people maintain things. That's just the way it works. There's absolutely no shame in it. Nobody's ashamed of anything. The voice hadn't changed. Same flat, mild, tired tone. Not a challenge. Just a statement of fact from someone who dealt in facts. Good. That's good. Jennifer grinned. But maybe, and I'm just trying to help here, maybe instead of teaching your kid to throw a punch, you show him something you actually know. The practical stuff. How to hold a mop. Where the bucket goes. That's a real skill. That'll actually, she paused, timing it, feed a family. The room went loud. Somebody actually clapped. Ryan was bent forward, one hand on his knee. A woman in the second row had her hand over her mouth, which was doing about 30% of the job of containing whatever was happening on her face. It was the biggest laugh Jennifer had gotten all week. She took a small, abbreviated bow, because why not? The room was hers. The room had always been hers. And Mark Anderson looked at his brother, not at Jennifer, not at the 30 people laughing. At Brian. He saw the way Brian's shoulders had pulled forward and in, the body doing unconsciously what it does when it needs to be smaller. He saw the jaw set tight. He saw the eyes down, fixed somewhere on the mat, around the middle distance. And he saw the particular careful stillness of someone working very hard not to give the room something to confirm about them. Don't let them see it, Mark had told him once, years ago, in a different context entirely. You can feel it. You're allowed to feel it. But you don't have to hand it to them. Don't give them that. It costs too much and they haven't earned it. Brian was doing that now. Exactly that. At 18 years old, in a room full of strangers and their phones, doing the thing correctly, paying the cost of it completely alone. And something in Mark's chest, something he'd spent 9 years building a very specific, an intentional structure around moved. Not rage. He'd learned long before now to distrust rage. Rage was loud and simple and pointed outward. What moved in him was not that. It was something older, something that didn't have a temperature the way most feelings have a temperature. Cold, if anything. A stillness dropping through the center of his chest and settling in his hands. The world slowing. Every exit in the room clarifying. The distance between himself and Jennifer Williams, which was approximately 9 feet, becoming very precise and very legible. He had lived in this place before. He had done things in this place he would not describe to another person as long as he was alive. And he recognized it the way you recognize a road you've driven in the dark, not by seeing it but by the specific feel of it under you. Not for this, he thought it clearly. Not over a joke, not over this. Come on, Brian. Quiet. Let's get your stuff. He would have done it. That was the truth. He would have walked his brother out of that building and eaten every single ounce of it, because that was the harder thing, and the harder thing was almost always the right thing. That was the whole architecture of the life he'd built here. You feel it. You choose not to use it. You walk your brother home and you eat dinner, and tomorrow is another day. He was 3 steps from the door when Jennifer stepped into his path, not touching. She wasn't touching him, just planting herself in the space between where he was and where the exit was. The specific gesture of someone who needed him to stay more than he needed to go, and couldn't quite say so directly. The smile was still present, but something had shifted in the room behind it. Some animal awareness that a man walking away quietly was worse, for the story she'd been telling herself than a man who pushed back. A man who walks out with his dignity intact, makes the loud person in the room into the loud person. And some part of Jennifer Williams had felt that without being able to name it, which is the most dangerous kind of feeling. She said it, conversationally, offered it like an observation. You come in here every night, you watch us train. I've seen the look. I've seen it on 100 different guys. The guy who thinks he could do it too, if things had been different, if life hadn't, you know. She tilted her head slightly. The guy on the couch who's very certain he would have done better. You should let us go. Mark's voice hadn't changed at all. Same flat, mild register. Same complete absence of performance. Which was somehow the thing that got deepest under Jennifer's skin, not defiance, not anger, not the wounded pride she was used to dealing with, but the total refusal to be interesting in a way she could manage. She couldn't find the crack. Or what? She was smiling again. The phones had started coming up around the room, and she could feel them without looking, that particular shift in the air. That's the question, right? Or what? So finish it. What happens if I don't let you leave? What are you going to do about it, maintenance man? I'm going to take my brother home. I don't think you are. She stepped back, gave herself space, turned to the room, with both arms out the showman's gesture, the one that says, look at this, look at all of us, look at what we're about to see. I think this is a guy who talks a very big game in his own head and does absolutely nothing in real life, which is fine. That's most people, but don't come into my house and give me that look. She stepped back further. More space, more stage. And then she did the thing. Tell you what. Her voice pitched up the register that fills a room, that reaches the phones, that is designed to be captured. You think there's something in there under the flannel? You think I'm missing something? Prove it. One shot. She tapped her chin with 2 fingers. Twice. The oldest invitation in the book. That's all you get. 1 free shot. You landed clean. I apologize to your brother on camera right now, in front of everybody. You miss. A shrug. Theatrical. You go back to whatever you were doing and we never talk about it again. 1 punch. Prove it. The room went loud in a different way. The particular sound of 30 people who came to a class and have found themselves at a live event instead. Phones up in a wave. Somebody yelled something. Ryan was filming with the absolute enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed he was about to watch something good happen to someone who deserved it. And Mark Anderson stood in the middle of all of it and didn't move. Here is what nobody in that room could see. Behind his eyes, a door that he'd spent 9 years welding shut was vibrating in its frame. Not open, not yet, but the vibration was real. And he could feel it the way you feel a bridge moving under your feet in the wind, not visible to anyone watching, but present to the person on the bridge. He could see, with a clarity that had nothing to do with bravery, exactly how this would go. He could see the distance between them. He could see the way Jennifer held her weight forward, offensive, hands low, the posture of someone who'd never once in her career stood across from someone who could reach her before she chose to be reached. He could see 4 distinct ways to put her on the mat before her reflexes had finished being surprised. He could see it the way you see arithmetic, not feeling, not desire, just obvious. Just the answer sitting there. And that was precisely the problem, because the easy thing, the thing his body was beginning to organize itself around, without being asked, wasn't discipline. It wasn't strength. It was just the easiest thing in the room. And he'd spent 9 years learning that easy wasn't the same as right, and that the easiest thing was almost always the thing you had to be most careful about. Walk away, he told himself. Walk your brother out of this room, eat it. That's the job of Mark. Brian's voice, quiet, right beside him. He looked down. And Brian wasn't looking at the floor anymore. He wasn't doing the careful stillness, wasn't performing the containment. He was looking up at his brother with a very specific tiff expression on his 18-year-old face. The expression of someone who has just done a piece of math they didn't want to do and arrived at an answer they didn't want to have. 30 people had laughed at their father, at their older brother, at the person Brian Thompson needed most to still be himself when this was over. and some part of 18 years of living with someone had done the calculation, the one no one that age should ever have to do. And what lived in Brian's face right now was not embarrassment about his own bad punch. It was fear for Mark. They're laughing at him, and he's about to walk away. And I don't know yet if that means he's the strongest person in this room, or if I just watched something break that I'm going to spend the rest of my life wishing I hadn't seen. It was all right there, naked and waiting, and entirely too young to be carrying that weight. Mark understood something in that moment with the specific clarity that only half-seconds can carry. There were two ways to fail Brian right now. Two, and only two. The first was to walk out quietly and let 30 people watch the maintenance man swallow a joke and say nothing, and teach his brother that the world is allowed to take swings at the people you love, and the correct response is to say thank you and sweep up afterward. The second was to step forward and be everything Jennifer Williams was inviting him to be the other thing, the thing he'd spent 9 years keeping in a box on a high shelf, and put her on her knees in front of her students and teach his brother that the answer to someone causing harm is to become something more frightening than they are. Both of those were failures. He had lived the second one. He knew exactly where it went. He knew it the way you know a road that took you somewhere you never went back to, not because you forgot how to find it, but because you knew precisely what was there. There had to be a third thing. There was always a third thing, somewhere. He just hadn't found it yet, and he had approximately 2 seconds before this room made the choice for him. So he did the only thing that bought him the time he needed. He looked up at Jennifer Williams. When? Just that. One word, delivered in the same tone he'd been using. All night, the flat, mild, tired voice of a man with somewhere to be and something better to do. Not a challenge, not a performance. More like a man asking for clarification about a piece of information he needed before he could proceed. The whole gym stopped, not quieted, stopped. The way a video stops. When someone hits, pause, everything suspended exactly where it was. The particular silence of 30 people who had been waiting for one specific sound and heard something else instead. Jennifer's grin faltered, not collapsed, just flickered, for a single frame, gone so briefly that later, watching the video back the 43rd time, she could barely find the exact moment. But it was there. That frame existed, and what replaced the grin was something that took another day to identify. Because she'd spent so long cultivating the state of being afraid of nothing that she'd lost the vocabulary for it. Cold. That's what it was. Something cold that walked up the back of her neck without invitation and wouldn't leave. She covered it, the way she covered everything, with more volume, more surface area, more room filled. When she repeated it and manufactured a laugh and turned it back toward the room. He wants to schedule it. Everybody hear this? He wants to put it in the calendar. The room laughed, but it was a degree different than it had been. Not all the way with her. Something had shifted under the floor. Okay, big man? When? Not here. Mark's voice didn't rise. Not tonight, not in front of him. A single tilt of the head toward Brian. You want to do this right, we do it right. A time, a place, someone neutral to make sure it's fair. So there's no story afterward about how someone didn't play by the rules. You understand me? That last phrase, the particular weight it carried. Not a question, not a request. The tone of a man explaining the rules of something to a person who didn't yet understand how serious the thing was. Jennifer heard it. Ryan heard it. Ryan lowered his phone 2 inches, which for Ryan was equivalent to someone else losing their footing entirely. Coach, he said it uncertainly. You okay? I'm fine. She snapped it, which was the first time she'd ever used that tone on Ryan, and he felt it like a physical thing. Of course I'm fine. She looked at Mark, and something in her, the part that had been doing this long enough to know when a room has changed underneath you, wanted badly to let it go. To laugh it off. To wave her hand and say never mind, and let the maintenance man have his quiet moment and go home and chalk it up to an interesting Tuesday. She had been doing this since she was 17. She had built the whole thing, the gym, the banner, the students, the face on the flyers, on never blinking, on never being the one who backed down. Not once Not from anyone. She could not be the one who blinked at the man with the trash bag. Fine. She lifted her chin. Let the word land flat. You want official? We'll make it official. Saturday, 9 days. Right here, this mat. Doors open. Everybody welcome. We put it out. We let the whole city come watch. We do it clean and we do it right. She pointed. One finger. The gesture of someone planting a flag. That work for your schedule? Saturday. Mark picked up his brother's backpack from the bench at the edge of the mat, held it out without looking back. Get your shoes on. 9 days, Jennifer said. Not to him anymore. To the room, to the phones, to the moment. One punch. That's all you get. One from me, everything I've got. One from you. She watched him not turn around. Don't chicken out on me. Mark didn't turn around, but Brian did. At the door, pulling his second sneaker on with one hand, his brother's backpack over one shoulder, Brian Thompson turned and looked back at the room. At Jennifer Williams. At the banner with her face on it. At Ryan still holding his phone. At 30 people who had spent the last 20 minutes making their choice about who mattered. There was no fear in Brian's face. No anger, no performance, just a look. Quiet and 18 years old, and entirely without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. The particular expression a person gets when they understand something that the people around them don't understand yet and aren't sure when they will. He didn't say a word. He looked at her for exactly one beat too long, then turned and followed his brother out into the Portland night. The door swung shut. The room sat with itself. Jennifer Williams stood on her own mat, under her own banner, surrounded by people who had just watched her win. And for the first time in longer than she could calculate, she could not locate the feeling that was supposed to come after winning. The truck's heater took its time, the way it always did. Mark drove with both hands at 10 and 2, and the wipers going against a thin rain that couldn't quite decide what it wanted to be. For 4 blocks, neither of them said a word. Brian sat with the backpack in his lap, arms around it, watching the wet streetlights go past. Mark, yeah. Are you actually going to fight her? Mark watched a light go yellow and eased the truck to a stop the same. Choice he made every time at every yellow light, a habit so consistent it had stopped looking like a decision. Eat your granola bar. Side pocket, you didn't have dinner, Mark. Brian's voice had something in it, something more than the question. She was on the news. Ryan told me she went undefeated for almost 2 years. He told me she trains twice a day, every day, and has for 15 years. He told me she's fought people who trained their whole lives to fight people like her and they still. He stopped. Swallowed. Why did you say when? Why didn't you just... Another stop. We could have just walked. You always say that. You say the strong thing is to leave. You say you don't owe anyone a reaction. You say I know what I say, so why didn't you do it? The light went green. Mark didn't move for a moment. Behind them, no one was there. Just the rain and the signal and the wet painted lines on the road. Because you were watching, Mark said. He said it quietly. He pulled through the intersection. That's why. That's not. Brian turned in his seat, frustrated in the specific way of someone who needed an answer to be simpler than the answer was. That's not an answer. That doesn't explain anything. It will. Someday it will. I promise you. A long silence. Are you going to win? And Mark Anderson, who could have told his brother the truth, who could have said that he'd stood across from people with a great deal more skill and experience than Jennifer Williams would ever have, that winning was not remotely the variable he was worried about, that the actual question was not the one Brian was asking. Looked at his brother's face in the green dashboard light and understood that the question was wrong, that the whole next 9 days were going to be about that. About finding the right question, about teaching it. I don't know yet, Mark said. Which was the only true answer to the question Brian actually needed answered. Brian slumped back. He wasn't satisfied. He was 18 and tired, and his ears were still warm, and his brother's hands were steady on the wheel. And the hands had gotten him through the worst year of his life, so he let them carry him now. He ate the granola bar from the side pocket. Without saying anything else, they rode home through the rain. But there was a shoebox on the top shelf of Mark's closet, behind the winter blankets, where it had been for 9 years. A shoebox Brian had seen exactly once from a distance and had never been allowed to open. And in 9 days, before he walked back into that gym, Mark Anderson was going to have to take that box of down, open it, and decide how much of the man inside it his brother was old enough to meet. The wipers swept the rain away. It came back, the wipers swept it away again. Across Portland, a shaky phone video was already at 10,000 views, then 20, then 50. The title someone had given it, Kickboxing Champ Calls Out Janitor, he says one word. The comment section was 1,000 people already certain they knew what they were looking at. Not one of them did. By the time Mark pulled into his driveway, 40,000 strangers had already decided who he was. He didn't know that yet. He turned off the truck, sat for a moment in the dark with his hands still on the wheel. Then he got out and went inside. He rinsed the one plate in the sink, set the coffee machine for morning, checked the back door, checked it again, the old habit, the one that had never left. Then he picked up his phone, which had been buzzing since they'd gotten in the truck. 19 times he'd let it go. The video was at the top, 51,000 views, 3 hours. Someone had captioned it with a laughing emoji. And the words, he really thought he was doing something. Mark watched 30 seconds of it with the sound off. In the video, he looked exactly like what the caption said he was. A tired man in work clothes holding a trash bag saying one word to a laughing champion. The phones hadn't caught his eyes. They'd caught his posture, his stillness, which read completely differently on a 4-inch screen than it felt from 9 feet away on the mat. He turned the phone face down. The front door opened. He hadn't heard it coming. He never didn't hear doors, which told him something about where his head was. 9 days out. Laura Clark stood in the kitchen doorway, still in her coat, her own phone in her hand. The look on her face, the specific look of someone who has learned something they didn't want to know. Ra, it's midnight. You said yes. She held the phone up. You said yes to fighting a professional. My coworker sent it to me. My dentist posted it. There are currently 17 comments using the phrase "oh no," and 4 people have made it into a meme with circus music. Circus music, Mark. She stopped herself, tried a different register. Quieta. I saw what she said about the mop. In front of Brian. Her jaw worked. I watched it twice and I want to drive over there and... That's the thing I'm trying not to teach him. Mark filled a glass of water at the sink. Laura stared at him. She was 4 years younger than him, and she had known him her whole life. And there had been an 11-year stretch in the middle of it where she hadn't known him at all. He'd come home from whatever the programs were called. He'd never named them to her. Not specifically, not the places or the missions or the things the missions required, and he'd been quieter each time. Older each time. Until the day he came home for good, and was so still, and so careful, and so deliberate about everything that she'd cried in her car for 20 minutes and then gone inside and hugged him, and hadn't explained the crying, and he hadn't asked. She'd gotten her brother back in a form she hadn't known before, and she'd loved that form more than the one she'd grown up with, which had seemed impossible until it wasn't. She knew what he used to be. She was one of maybe 3 people alive who knew, and that knowledge had specific weight on her chest right now, in this kitchen. Mark. She set her phone on the counter. Look at me. Are you going to hurt her? Just that. The only question that actually mattered. He set the water glass down without drinking from it. The kitchen clock ticked. A car went by outside, headlights crossing the ceiling and leaving. No, he said. She waited. I'm not going to hurt her. You paused. Rai saw it. I know what that pause means. I've seen it exactly one other time. She took a step closer, dropped her voice. It was the night before you left for the second deployment. And you looked at me with the same eyes and said the same no, with the same voice, and then you were gone for 18 months, and came back. Different. Her eyes were wet. So I'm asking you as your sister, what happens when she comes at you Saturday with everything she has, and 30 cameras are pointed at you and she catches you right? What happens to the man I got back? The kitchen held the question. Down the hall, the heater ticked. The rain had picked up slightly against the window. That's the whole problem, Mark said. That's exactly what I've been sitting in the truck, thinking about for an hour. He looked at her. and for one moment the careful exterior moved. The way ice moves on a river. When the temperature changes, you see it happen, but you can't quite catch the exact moment. Under it, something she hadn't seen in 9 years and had hoped never to see again. Not fear of Jennifer Williams. Something older. I don't know what happens, that's the truth. 9 years I've kept that door closed, and I don't actually know how strong the lock is because I've never tested it. I've never had a reason to open it on purpose. He paused. Saturday I'm going to have to open it a crack. On purpose, in a room with Brian watching. Then don't do it. Call it off. I can't call it off. Why not? Let them laugh. You've eaten worse. He asked me if I was going to win. Mark's voice stayed level. In the truck on the way home. He asked me if I was going to win, Ra. He's 18, and that's the question. Win or lose. He looked at me, and that's what he needed to know. He shook his head, slow. I can't blame him for it. That room taught him that tonight. The whole world is about to finish teaching it to him, this week. 2 kinds of people, the ones who prove it and everybody else. He was quiet for a moment. If I call it off, he learns his brother is everybody else. And if I walk in there and I take her apart in 30 seconds, which I can do, and some part of me, some part I don't love anymore, wants to. He stopped. He learns the answer is to be scarier than whoever's hurting you, Laura said. Both of those are lies. And he doesn't have parents to unteach them. He's got me. He looked at his hands on the counter. There has to be a third thing. There always is. I just haven't found it yet. I've got 9 days. Which would have been a fine place to leave it. The 2 of them in the kitchen at midnight with the rain on the windows. And a problem without an answer yet, and 9 days to find it. Except at that exact moment, from the dark hallway behind Laura, came a voice that stopped both of them completely. What door? Brian was standing in the hall, in his socks. Neither of them had heard him come. The quiet of the house Mark had built working against him. Now he'd made it so still that a person could walk down a hallway on soft feet and arrive without announcement. Brian looked at his brother, looked at Laura. Back to Mark. His face had something in it that was worse than fear. Because it was the fear of someone who has understood that there is a thing they don't know and that the thing is important. You said there's a door you keep shut, Brian said. He stepped into the kitchen light. Aunt Laura said you came back different. Different from what? What are you guys actually talking about? His chin was level, voice steady, but his eyes were doing something his voice wasn't. What door, Mark? Mark looked at his sister. Laura looked back at him. 9 years of an agreement they'd never written down, never spoken aloud, moving between them in the space of a look. He doesn't need to know. Give him a normal brother. Let him have that. And Mark understood, standing in his own kitchen at midnight with his brother 18 years old, and asking the right question for the wrong reasons, that the agreement was over, that it had ended the moment Jennifer Williams pointed at Brian and performed for 30 people. Quiet. Give us a minute. Laura looked at Brian, looked at her brother. She crossed to Brian and squeezed his shoulder on her way past. And at the front door she stopped with her back to both of them. Whatever you decide to tell him, she said, he can take more than you think. He's yours. Then she was gone into the rain. The door closed behind her. Mark pulled out a kitchen chair. Sit down, Brian. Brian sat. Mark didn't sit yet. He went to the hallway, and Brian heard the closet door. The specific sound of something being pulled down from a high shelf. When Mark came back, he was carrying a shoebox Brian had seen from a distance exactly once in his life and had understood without being told was not for him. He set it on the table between them. Before I show you what's in here, Mark said, I need you to understand something first. Can you do that? Okay. The man in this box is me, but he's a version of me from before you were old enough to remember anything. And I'm showing him to you because I think you're old enough now, and because I'd rather you hear about him from me than from somewhere else. He put his hand flat on the lid. Didn't lift it yet. He scared people, Brian, on purpose. And there's a part of me that's still not afraid of him exactly. More like careful about him. You understand what I'm telling you? Not really, Brian said. Honest, that's okay. A pause. You will. He lifted the lid. On top was a photograph. Brian leaned over it. Men standing in front of a concrete wall somewhere with flat sand and white sky. Tactical gear, no insignia on anything, the kind of deliberate blankness that means something specific. In the middle, second from the left, was a man Brian recognized as his brother, because it was his brother's face. Same jaw, same nose, different eyes entirely. The eyes in that photograph were flat and quiet and ancient in a way Mark's eyes in daily life were not. They looked at the camera the way you look at something that doesn't scare you, because very little does anymore. "That's you," Brian said. It came out quieter than he meant it. "That's me, 24 years old. 11 years of programs I'm not allowed to name, in places I can't describe specifically. I was good at it." Mark sat down now, across from his brother, forearms on the table. "I was so good at it that the people who ran those programs kept extending my time. And the longer I was there, the more I discovered something about myself that I didn't like." He looked at his hands. Quiet. For a moment. When things got bad enough, there was a place I could go inside my own head where everything got slow, calm, clear. And in that place I could do whatever needed doing without feeling it. Not while it was happening. A pause that had weight in it. The feeling came later. Always came later. Brian was very still. "That place kept me alive. I won't lie to you and pretend it didn't. But it's not somewhere a good man visits on purpose. And by the end I was starting to prefer it. So I came home." A small, real smile moved across Mark's face for the first time all night. "And then I met your parents. Your mom looked at all of it. I told her everything. More than I've ever told anyone. And you know what she said?" Brian shook his head. "She said that man kept you alive so I could have you. So we'll thank him and then we'll put him away, and you and I are going to build something on top of the box where he lives." Brian's throat moved. "So that's what we did. We built a life on top of the box. And then you came along, and you were the best thing ever built on top of anything." Mark stopped. "Had to. And when your parents got sick when we lost them, she made me promise one thing before she was gone. She didn't ask me to be happy. She knew that was too much to ask. She grabbed my hand and she said, 'Promise me he never meets that man. Promise me our son, our Brian, never has to be afraid of you.'" The kitchen clock ticked. The rain was quiet now, lighter against the glass. "That's the promise I've been keeping," Mark said. "That's the whole reason I fix floors for a living instead of the dozen other things I know how to do. Because floors are quiet. Because nobody gets hurt. Because I mopped a floor too hard. Because I can pick you up from campus and be home by 9, and that is the whole job." He looked at his brother, and that woman tonight was taking a hammer to it, in front of 30 strangers, for a laugh. Brian looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked up, and Mark had been bracing himself. Had been bracing himself for 9 years. If he was honest, for the thing he saw next. For the fear, for the specific change that happens in someone's eyes when they understand that the person they need most is also a person with things inside them that don't have simple names. Brian didn't look afraid. Brian looked like something in his chest was breaking, and it wasn't for himself. "You could have stopped her," he said. "The whole time." "Not a question." "Yeah," Mark said it quietly. "I could have. But you didn't because you promised. Because I promised." Brian got up out of the kitchen chair. He came around the table, and he put his arms around his brother's neck. "The way you hold onto something you're afraid might not stay." Mark Anderson, who had been still in places that would break most people, who had a door welded shut in his chest, and a champion coming for him in 9 days, put his hand on the back of his brother's head and held on. "I'm not scared of you," Brian said into his shoulder. "I want you to know that. Whatever's in that photograph, I'm not. I know. And you don't have to win Saturday. I take it back. I don't care about that. Just," he stopped, tightened his grip. "I just need you to come back still being you." Mark held him tighter. "That," he said, "might be the most important thing anyone has said to me in a very long time." They stayed like that a while. And it could have been the end of the night. The warm version. The truth out on the kitchen table between them and two people who could breathe a little. But 2 miles away at that same midnight hour, Jennifer Williams was sitting alone in her dark office watching a video for the 40th time, and she had stopped laughing at it, around view 3. 100,000, and half the comments weren't doing what she expected, and a 10-year-old's feeling that quiet, pitying, inexplicable look Brian had given her from the doorway was still there in the back of her chest, doing something she didn't have a name for yet. Children don't look at people who are about to win with eyes like that. Children look at people who don't know what's coming. The video hit 1 million views sometime around 4 in the morning, while Portland slept and Mark Anderson did not. He knew because his phone screen lit up on the kitchen counter. He hadn't turned it all the way off. Old habit, the kind that doesn't leave, even when everything else about a life has changed. He watched the notification arrive without picking up the phone. Just the rectangle of light on the ceiling above the counter. Then another. Then 3 more in quick succession. He didn't touch it. He rinsed his coffee cup, dried it, put it exactly where it lived on the second shelf. Went to bed at 1:17 and lay on his back and looked at the ceiling for 2 hours and 40 minutes without quite sleeping. What he thought about wasn't Jennifer Williams. He thought about a yellow light, the one at Morrison and 12th, the one he'd stopped at on the way home, while Brian asked why he'd said when instead of walking away. He thought about the half-second before the light turned green, when he'd sat with his hands on the wheel and said, "Because you were watching." Thought about whether that was enough of an answer, or whether it was the kind of answer that only made sense to the person giving it. He thought about Brian's face on the mat, the exact moment the math had shifted, when Brian stopped being embarrassed about his own punch and started being afraid for someone else. 18 years old and already carrying that. Already doing the impossible arithmetic of loving someone whose full dimensions you don't know yet. At 4:12 he got up, went to the kitchen, and made the coffee he'd already set up the night before. He stood at the window while it brewed and watched the rain do what Portland rain does. In October, commit fully. No ambivalence, just water from the sky, with the patience of something that has been doing this for 10,000 years and plans to continue. His phone screen lit up 4 more times. He let it. Morning arrived the way. Mornings arrive after bad nights, not suddenly, just gradually less dark. The neighborhood assembling itself out of the black in pieces. The Hendersons' porch light across the street. The shape of the maple tree. The white lines of the curb. Brian came down at 7:14, still in yesterday's clothes, hair doing 3 different things, and stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at his brother, with the particular expression of someone who has been thinking all night and has arrived somewhere they didn't mean to go. How many? Mark handed him a cup without being asked. Don't. I just want to know. It doesn't matter how many. Over 1 million? Mark looked at him over the rim of his own cup. Brian took that as a yes. He sat down at the kitchen table and stared at his coffee like it had personally inconvenienced him. Ryan texted me, Brian said, at 6:30 this morning. He said there's a guy in the comments with 8,000 likes who wrote a whole breakdown of your body language and why you're definitely military. He said people are making predictions. Odds, like actual gambling odds, on you. Ryan should text people at more reasonable hours. He's excited. I noticed he thinks you're going to lose. Mark drank his coffee. Ryan's young. Brian looked at his brother. You're not worried about losing? About any of it. And Mark set his cup down and looked at Brian with the specific patience of someone who has something true to say and is taking a moment to find the right arrangement of words for it. I'm worried about exactly one thing, and it's not Jennifer Williams's hands, and it's not the cameras, and it's not the people in the comments making odds. He held his brother's eyes. You know what I'm worried about. Brian knew. He'd been lying on the ceiling of his room thinking about it since 1 in the morning. The door. The thing on the other side of the door. The flat, ancient eyes in the photograph. He wrapped both hands around his cup and didn't say anything else. The phone rang at 8:47. An unfamiliar number with a Portland area code. Mark let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later it rang again. He let that go too. The 3rd time he picked up. Because 3 times means someone has made a decision. George White's voice had the particular oiled quality of a man who had spent decades the converting other people's problems into his own opportunities, and had gotten good enough at it that he'd stopped noticing the mechanism. Mark. Can I call you Mark? Mark, I'm going to be straight with you because I think you're the kind of guy who appreciates straight. My name's George White. I promote combat sports events in the Pacific Northwest, and what happened at Iron Ridge last night is the most organic content moment I have seen in 11 years of doing this. I mean organic. Nobody manufactured this. Nobody hired a marketing firm. This is a real human story, and the internet is losing its mind over it, and I want to help you. What do you want, Mr. White? A beat. George was not used to being interrupted that cleanly. I want to produce Saturday. I want to bring in proper cameras, not phone cameras, actual broadcast quality rigs, lighting, a live stream with real infrastructure. I want to get the word out through my channels, which are significant, and I want to make sure that whatever happens Saturday is captured the way it deserves to be captured. And what do you get? A percentage of the live stream revenue. Standard split. I've done this 100 times. And what does Jennifer Williams get? Another beat. Shorter. She gets the platform. She gets the audience. She gets the chance to... Does she know you're calling me? Silence. The kind that answers the question. Call her first, Mark said. Whatever she says goes. It's her gym. He hung up and went back to his coffee, which had gone cold. Brian was watching him from across the table. Who was that? Promoter. What did he want? To turn it into a show. Is it going to be a show? Mark looked at the rain on the kitchen window. It already is one. Question is what kind. George White called Jennifer Williams at 3, and the conversation lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds, during which Jennifer said almost nothing, while George said a great deal about story arcs and audience engagement and the phrase every man angle 3 times in different configurations. When he finished, she was quiet long enough that he checked to see if the call had dropped. I don't know if I want to do this anymore, she said. The silence on George's end was a different kind. Recalibrating silence. Jennifer. His voice changed register lower, more personal, the voice he used, when regular smooth wasn't working, and he needed something that felt more like a hand on the shoulder. I need you to hear me. You put it out there. That's your face on that video. Your gym, you said Saturday on camera in front of 40 people who were all filming. You back out now. You're not the champion who got cold feet. You're the bully who picked on a working man and his brother in front of a camera and then disappeared when it went big. A pause, letting the shape of it settle. Right now, you're the villain people love, the one they're rooting against but can't stop watching. You quit. You're just the villain. Jennifer said nothing for a moment. Through the phone, George could hear the ambient sound of the gym, the early class, the bag work, the squeaky third floorboard she'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. The only way out is through Saturday, George said. Trust me, I've seen this 100. She hung up. She stood at the front counter of her own gym, holding a phone that had just delivered a set of options she hadn't chosen and couldn't refuse. And she understood, with the cold clarity of someone who'd been backed into corners enough times to recognize the architecture she'd built this one herself, with her own hands, out of the particular materials she'd always used, the cheap laugh, the easy target, the reflex she'd never examined, because it always worked until it didn't. The only door out of the room led directly through a quiet man in work clothes who had looked at her from 9 feet away with eyes she was still trying to understand. Across the city, at that same hour, that quiet man was in the plumbing aisle of a hardware store on Burnside with his brother, buying a washer for a leaky faucet at a property on his maintenance route, because life didn't stop for viral videos, because the rent on the property didn't know it was famous, because there was a faucet in a guest bathroom dripping at approximately 1 drop every 4 seconds, and the owner had called Tuesday morning, and Mark had said he'd be there by noon. Brian spotted them first. 2 men, mid-30s, one of them with his phone already half raised, the other saying something behind his hand, and grinning. The specific body language of people who have recognized someone, and are deciding how to perform that recognition. Brian's hand found Mark's sleeve. They're laughing at you. Mark was reading the back of a washer package, the right size, wrong material. He put it back. I know, they're just... Brian turned slightly away from them, the reflex of someone who wants to disappear the situation. They're doing it right there. They're not even... Brian. Mark found the right washer. 98 cents. Rubber, correct diameter. He dropped it in the small basket he was carrying. Look at me. Brian looked. In 5 days, those 2 guys will not matter to me, even a little bit, not 1%. They will be absolutely nothing to me. He held his brother's eyes. But you will matter to me for the rest of my life. So I've got one job this week, and it's not to change what those guys think, and it's not to win a fight, and it's not to make anybody feel anything. My job is to walk into that gym Saturday and walk back out of it, still being your brother. That is the entire job. Everything else is noise. Brian stared at him. How are you so calm about this? I'm not calm. Mark steered them toward the register, with a hand on the back of Brian's neck, the light, habitual gesture of someone who has been navigating a younger person through doorways for years. I'm choosing what to do with what I feel. That's different from not feeling it. That night, after Brian was asleep, Mark sat in his garage on an overturned 5-gallon bucket and did not train. Laura had called at 7 and asked about this specifically. He'd told her he wasn't going to. The silence on her end had the texture of someone physically restraining themselves from an argument. She's training, Laura said finally. I looked it up. She has access to a full gym, sparring partners, a coach. She's been drilling specific combinations. There was a video she posted this afternoon of her working the speed bag, and she looked. A pause. She looked good, Mark. She is good. Then what are you? The problem I'm trying to solve isn't a physical problem. He looked at his hands in the dim garage light. The more full I am of the real stuff, when I walk in Saturday, the ordinary life. The coffee, the faucet I fixed this afternoon. Brian's voice, the less room there is for the other thing. You don't beat that by training your body. You beat it by being so much yourself that there's nowhere for it to stand. Laura was quiet for a long time. That is either the most profound thing you've ever said or you're about to get seriously hurt. Could be both. Mark, go home, Ra. I'm fine. You paused before fine. Good night. He sat in the garage after he hung up and listened to the specific quiet of a house where someone was asleep and someone was not. The rain had stopped. The street was wet and reflecting the orange of the streetlights. Somewhere, down the block, a dog was handling a philosophical objection to something, and in the very back of his mind, patient and familiar and not going anywhere, the thing he never named directly was sitting exactly where it always sat, behind the door, aware that the door would be opening in less than a week, not pressing, not urgent, just there, the way a river is there, not demanding anything, just present, with all of its weight, waiting for whatever gap you give it. He sat on the bucket until 11. He went to bed and slept better than he expected, and didn't dream about anything he needed to write down. Wednesday, Jennifer Williams received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize and almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end was male, mid-40s, the particular flatness of someone who has decided before they dial that they're not calling to be comforted. I don't know if you remember me. I trained at Iron Ridge about 2 years ago. 6 months. My name is... He said a name she didn't immediately place, and then he said something. She did immediately place a specific class, a specific evening, a specific moment she had not thought about since, because she never thought about specific moments that weren't useful to her anymore. She had stopped the class to correct his stance, which was reasonable. The correction itself was reasonable. But the way she'd done it in front of 12 other students, with the particular tone that turned a technical note into a verdict, had not been reasonable, had been the reflex, the easy laugh, the way of establishing the room's hierarchy that didn't require anyone to threaten her directly, because everyone already understood what happened to the person who got corrected like that. He'd come back for 3 more classes, then he'd stopped. I saw the video, he said. Everybody did. I don't know that guy. I don't know what he's going to do Saturday, and I don't really care. He stopped, cleared his throat. The sound of someone who has rehearsed something, and is now discovering that the rehearsed version isn't the one. That's coming out. I was training for my brother. He died the year before I joined, and I had a real reason to be there, and I left. A pause. I didn't leave because the commute was bad, or because I found another gym. I left because I walked out of that class, and sat in my car for 20 minutes, and couldn't make myself go back in, and I never did. Another pause longer. I just wanted you to know that. I'm not calling to be mean. I just thought you should know what that cost. He hung up. Jennifer stood at her front counter for a long time after that. The morning class was happening 20 feet away. She could hear Ryan calling out a combination to someone, the slap of gloves on leather, the squeak of the third board. She'd thought about the video. She'd thought about Mark's eyes. She'd thought about Brian's face at the door and what it had meant and why it kept returning to her in the dark. She hadn't thought, not once, about the people who'd left quietly, the ones with no cameras, the ones who'd just stopped coming and hadn't made it anyone's business but their own. There was no way to count them. That was the part that sat on her chest for the rest of the morning like a stone. No way to know the number. No way to know what they'd been carrying when they walked through her door and what they'd walked back out with. She taught the morning class. She was technically perfect. She was also somewhere else. Thursday. The comments section of the original video had bifurcated cleanly into two camps that weren't talking to each other. One side was enthusiastic about Saturday for the reasons George White found commercially interesting. The other side had found something in the 37 seconds of Mark Anderson saying one flat word and then refusing to perform for the room, something they couldn't. Entirely articulate but kept trying to. He's not scared. That's the thing. Look at his eyes. He's not scared of her at all. Someone with a handle involving the word Ranger had replied, "I've known guys who look like that. You do not want to find out what you look like to someone who looks like that." That comment had 4,000 likes by Thursday afternoon, and a thread beneath it of 260 replies. Mark didn't read any of it. He fixed a garage on Wednesday, diagnosed a boiler issue on Thursday morning, and spent Thursday afternoon replacing a section of copper pipe under a kitchen sink on the east side. He picked Brian up from campus at 3:42. They drove to the grocery store. They made dinner. Mark washed the dishes. Brian dried them, which he'd started doing 8 months ago without being asked, and which Mark had never commented on, because commenting on it would have made it a thing when it was better as just a thing that happened. Brian was quiet all through dinner, not the sullen quiet of someone who needed the active quiet of someone turning something over. He put down his dish towel at 7:53. "Can I ask you something?" Mark handed him the last plate. "You're going to regardless. Why didn't you use the punch?" Mark looked at him. "She gave you one punch," Brian said. "That was the deal. One free shot. You never took it." He put the plate away. "You were there. You had the shot. Why didn't you just end it clean? Use the one you were given." Mark dried his hands, set the towel on the counter. "What would that have proven?" "That you could, Brian. Not sharp. Just the particular tone of someone pointing at the actual question from 1 degree over. The whole point was never to prove I could. If I walk in there, take my one shot, drop her on the mat, and walk out, what does she learn? What do the 30 people in the room learn? What do you learn?" He shook his head. "That the guy with the better training wins. That's it. That's the whole lesson. The strong person beats the other person. We already knew that. That's not why I said when." Brian was quiet, processing. "The punch was never the point," Mark said. "What happens when I don't take it? That's the point. What happens when a person who can end something chooses not to?" He looked at his brother across the kitchen. "That's the only lesson worth teaching." Brian thought about that for a long time. "What if you lose?" he said finally. "Not what if she beats you. What if you lose the specific phrasing of someone who started to understand that? The two things aren't identical." "Then I lose," Mark said, "and we go home, and I'm still your brother." Friday came in like the day before. A thing always comes in too slow and too fast at the same time. The hours stretching and compressing with no predictable pattern. Every ordinary task carrying the faint static of something large on the other side of tomorrow. Edward Harris called at 10:14. He owned Iron Ridge on paper, had signed the lease and the liability insurance and the business license, and had met Mark Anderson exactly twice in 8 months. Once when Mark came in to be shown the boiler room, and once when a pipe had burst, and Harris had shown up in clothes that communicated how rarely he visited. He was calling now with the warmth of a man who had recently learned the maintenance worker was worth more than the gym. "Mark. Dan, can I call you Dan?" "Listen, I've been looking at the numbers since Tuesday and our inquiry line has..." "It's Mark, right. Mark, listen. I want to bring you on. Real instructor role, salary, benefits. We'd obviously need to redo the banner, but no." The pause of a man who has not recently been told no by someone whose main qualification was a mop. "I'm sorry? No, I appreciate it, but no." Mark was on his back, under the gym's main electrical panel, which had been showing intermittent issues since September, that everyone had ignored, and that he'd been tracking with a particular kind of patience that comes from knowing a problem is real, even when no one else is treating it as one. "You didn't know my name on Monday, Mr. Harris. The only thing that changed between Monday and today is a number on a phone. I don't build my life around numbers on phones." A longer pause. "You're turning down an instructor position to keep..." "I'm turning down a banner to keep picking up my brother at 3:40. Those aren't the same thing, but they look similar from where you're standing." He found the loose connection he'd been looking for. "I'll keep doing the job I've been doing if you'll have me. That's all." Harris called back 40 minutes later to say the maintenance contract would continue. He said it like he was granting something. Mark said thank you and meant it, and let the man have the feeling. Laura arrived at the house at 6 Friday evening with a container full of soup. She said Brian needed because neither of them ate properly under stress, which was true. She stood in the kitchen while Mark served it and watched him with the particular surveillance of someone who had been watching him for 40 years and knew every note of, every register. "You slept," she said. "Not quite a question. Pretty well. That's either a good sign or a very bad sign." "I know." She sat, wrapped her hands around her soup bowl. "I watched the video again this morning, the original one." She looked at her brother across the table. "There's this frame. Right when she laughs the first time, and the room goes with her. You're holding the trash bag, and you're looking at Brian and your face does." She stopped. "It's very fast. But it does something. I know what it does." Does she know what she's standing across from tomorrow? Mark was quiet for a moment. "I think she's starting to. And that doesn't..." Laura searched for the right word. "That doesn't worry you." "It worries me about me, not about her." He looked at his soup. "A scared person makes unpredictable moves. Unpredictable moves are the ones that get through." He picked up his spoon. "She's going to come at me with everything she has because she's terrified and she can't show it. That's when something might land. That's the variable." Laura stared at him. "You're describing the scenario that hurts you like it's a weather pattern. It kind of is." "Mark, rah." He looked at her directly. "I've had 9 years of peace. Good years. Better than I deserved probably. Real ones. Brian's in college. The boiler at Iron Ridge runs. I sleep most nights." A pause. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I've had all of that. That's mine. Nobody's taking it back." She didn't say anything for a while. The soup steamed. Outside, the first night of the weekend was settling into the neighborhood, someone's television, a car with the bass too high, the general human sound of a city that didn't know or care what was happening in one house on one street. "He's going to be in the front row," Laura said. "I know. He told me this afternoon. He said he's standing where you can see him." Mark was quiet. "He's the one holding the door shut," Laura said softly. "Isn't he? That's the third thing. That's how it works." She watched her brother's face. "He's the reason you stop." Mark set down his spoon. "It's not a guaranteed reason." He said it carefully. "That's what I need you to understand. It's the best reason I've got. It's the only one that's ever worked on that part of me. But I've been opening this door on purpose for the first time in 9 years, and I don't know." He stopped. "I don't know how wide it goes. That's the truth, and I need you to know that the truth is I don't know." Laura reached across the table and put her hand over his. She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would have been better than just that. Brian came in from his room at 9:17 to tell them he was going to sleep early so he'd be rested, and both of them looked at him with such transparent feeling that he stopped in the doorway and frowned. "What? Nothing," Laura said. "Why do you both look like that?" "Like what?" Mark said. "Like I just said something sad you didn't," Mark said. "Go sleep. We'll be here." Brian looked at his brother for an extra second. "You're still okay. I'm still okay, okay." Brian looked at Laura. "Stop making that face." And then he went back down the hall. And his door closed, and the house was quiet again. And that was Friday. And then it was Saturday. And then it was morning. Mark was up at 5:47. Coffee, the window, the familiar ceremony of the day. He didn't feel the way he'd expected to feel, which was something he noted without surprise. He'd learned a long time ago that his body had its own relationship with significant events, a particular calm before them. Not peace, exactly, more like the absence of the ordinary noise. As if the system had done its preparation work and was simply waiting. He showered, put on clean clothes, the gray t-shirt, the track pants, the wrestling shoes from the back of the closet that he hadn't worn since before Portland. He didn't look at himself in the mirror any longer than it took to see that the cut above his left eyebrow, from where Brian had accidentally caught him with a cabinet door last week, had mostly healed. Nearly invisible. Fine. He went back to the gym before 6 to do the cleaning that was his job, and had always been his job regardless of what was happening at 6 in the evening. He mopped the mats. He wiped down the mirrors. He emptied the bins and checked the boiler, and replaced the buzzing bulb in the back corner that had been irritating him for 3 weeks. He was done by 8:30. He drove home, picked up Brian. They had breakfast at a diner 4 blocks from the house, where the coffee came in a carafe, and the paraks and the pancakes were exactly the same every time. And the woman who'd been working the counter since the place opened in 1987 called both of them honey, without distinguishing between them. "You good?" Brian asked over the pancakes. "Good," Mark said. "Really good, or just talking?" "Really good, you?" Brian considered this with the seriousness of someone answering an actual question. "Scared," he said. "But the useful kind. Like before a test when you study." Mark drank his coffee. "That's the right kind. What if it's not enough?" The table between them held the question for a moment. "Then we find out," Mark said. "And we come back from it. That's what we do. It's what we've always done." Brian nodded slowly. He ate his pancakes. Mark ate his. The carafe arrived again without being asked for, and both of them took it. At 2 in the afternoon, sitting in the parking lot of Iron Ridge with the engine off and 90 minutes still on the clock, Brian looked out the windshield at the crowd already forming outside the building and said, "Aunt Laura told me." Mark waited. "She told me I'm the reason you stop." If it comes to that, he was watching the crowd, not his brother. People with signs, people with phones already up, a kid wearing a t-shirt with the words "One Punch" on the front. "She said I'm the door." Mark was quiet. "I already knew," Brian said. "I knew that night in the kitchen. When you said whatever happens in there, he watches. I figured it out." He finally looked over. "So I need you to know that I'm going to be right where you can see me the whole time. First row, center. I already checked, there's a chair." He paused. "And if it gets bad," his voice stayed level with the visible effort of someone keeping it there on purpose, "you look for me. Okay? That's the deal. Whatever else is happening, you look for me and I'll be there." Mark looked at his brother for a long time. "You shouldn't have to be someone's guardrail at 18. Brian held his gaze. "And you shouldn't have had to be someone's brother and father and everything else. Since you were 27, we don't get to pick what we're for. We just do it." A small pause. "Mom used to say that." She had. She just said it in a slightly different context in the last months, when things were already certain and already decided. Mark had been the one she'd said it to. He hadn't passed it along. But Brian had been 17, and 17 hears things. "You ready?" Brian said. Mark looked at the building. At the banner with Jennifer Williams's face on it, slightly tilted from the October wind, her photographed expression carrying the immense and uncomplicated certainty of someone who had never yet been tested by the specific thing that was coming. "No," Mark said. "Let's go anyway." They got out of the truck and walked across the parking lot toward the door, and the crowd saw them, and the crowd made its sound, and neither of them slowed down. The door to the maintenance hallway opened with the specific resistance of a door Mark had repaired the hinge on in August, the one that needed a firm second push. He knew exactly how hard. He'd always known exactly how hard. He went in. Brian followed. The door swung shut behind them. In the boiler room, in the quiet before the event, Mark Anderson stood still for 30 seconds and breathed. The boiler ticked. The building was loud above them, crowd noise, filtering through the ceiling. The thud of feet. George White's voice somewhere doing his best impression of something important. 40,000 people on a live stream loading into chairs in their living rooms across the country, waiting for a maintenance worker to get what they'd already decided he deserved. None of that was real yet. Right now there was just the boiler room, the smell of the furnace, the sound of his own breathing, the specific weight of 9 years of a particular kind of careful that had led, in ways he could not have predicted from any single decision along the path, to this exact room. He thought about a yellow light at Morrison and 12th, the one he'd stopped at, because that was the right thing to do. Because that was always the right thing to do, one yellow light at a time. Brian put a hand on his shoulder, said nothing, just the hand. "All right," Mark said. They walked out of the boiler room, through the maintenance hallway, toward the door that opened onto the mat. The crowd noise grew with each step, and from somewhere in the front row, he knew, a 23-year-old, with the specific bravery of someone who understood exactly what they were volunteering for, was already finding his chair. Mark pushed the door open. The room hit him like a wall. The noise was a physical thing, not loud the way music is loud the way weather is loud, the kind of sound that has mass to it, that pushes against you when you step into it. 200 people in a space designed for 40, and the heat of them, and the sound of them, and the particular electric ugliness of a crowd that has come to watch someone get hurt, all of it, landing on Mark Anderson. The moment he stepped through the maintenance door and onto the edge of the mat, he scanned the room, couldn't stop himself. 9 years of ordinary life, and the scan still happened before the first conscious thought. The way breathing happens. The way the heart keeps its own schedule regardless of what you'd prefer. Exits. 4, 2 accessible. Weight distribution of the crowd. Heaviest along the east wall. Thinner near the equipment racks. The drone George White had rented hummed somewhere above the lights, its camera eye finding him immediately, which he registered and set aside. Jennifer was already out there. She'd been warming up for 20 minutes by the look of her shoulders loose, a faint high color, across her cheekbones, moving on the balls of her feet with the contained, clockwork energy of an engine at idle. Full fight gear, hair back tight, gloves already on. Under the overhead lights, she looked like exactly what she was, a professional in her element, in her house, on her terms. Ryan Robinson was in the third row, phone up, thrumming with the particular excitement of someone who had selected a side and expected to be proven right. Brian was in the front row center, standing on his chair. Mark found him within 4 seconds of entering, made eye contact. Brian gave one small nod, the economy of it deliberate, the nod of someone who had chosen their position and was committed to holding it. Mark nodded back. Then he walked out onto the cleared mat floor in his gray t-shirt and track pants and 9-year-old wrestling shoes, carrying nothing. And the crowd made its specific sound, at that, the sound of an expectation being confirmed. George White was at the microphone doing what George White did, the words rolling out in the round, inflated register of a man who had learned that volume communicates authority when actual authority is absent. Mark didn't track the words. He tracked Jennifer. She had stopped moving when he came out, just for a beat. Her eyes went to him and then to his hands, no wraps, no gloves, and then to his shoes, and he watched her read all of that, and he watched her choose not to read it correctly, because reading it correctly would have required a kind of honesty she wasn't ready for yet. She covered it with the grin, the practiced one, and she bounced back into her rhythm, and the crowd responded to her responding to them, and the room got louder. George finished his introduction. The crowd roared. The live stream counter, which Mark could see on a monitor someone had propped on a folding table near the entrance, read 62,000. George outlined the terms Jennifer's free run at Mark's single punch, and made it sound like generosity on Jennifer's part, which was exactly what Jennifer had designed it to sound like 9 days ago, and which was exactly as wrong now as it had been then. Jennifer stepped to her mark. She looked across the cleared floor at Mark, and something moved in her face, something beneath the performance layer, brief and real. The thing that had been sitting in her office at midnight, the thing the caller on Wednesday had put there and that hadn't fully left. Last chance. She dropped her voice. Off the mic. Just for him. You walk now, I absorb it. I'll tell them I called it off. You don't have to. You keep offering me the exit. Mark's voice was level mild, the same register he'd used on Tuesday and every day since. Because you don't understand why I won't take it. A pause. Her eyes on his. I know, he said. That's the problem, and I'm not going to fix it in the next 10 seconds. He rolled his shoulders once. Loose. Easy. Let's just do this. Something went out of her face then. The human thing. The flicker she'd been carrying since Wednesday. Closed over. And Jennifer Williams became the champion again. The one from the banner. Because the champion was the only person she fully knew how to be. When the thing underneath was frightened, she stepped back to her mark. Put her hands up. All of her in the posture now, chin down, elbows in, weight forward. 14 years of competition muscle memory settling into readiness. Mark's hands stayed at his sides. George's voice, fighters go. She came off her mark like something released. Fast. Faster than the crowd had expected based on the video. Because the video was a phone recording in a large room, and speed doesn't translate through phone cameras, not really. In person it was different. In person, Jennifer Williams's first combination was a revelation jab to set the range, cross behind it, with her full hip rotation, low kick to the lead leg before he could reset his base, hook to close the sequence. Sharp and clean and connected, and arriving in the time it takes a person to decide to inhale. Every single strike hit air, not because Mark had blocked, not because he'd retreated, because he was simply not there. A half step, a shoulder roll, a slip that was less than an inch at the head. And simultaneously, a pivot at the hips, and the whole combination sailed through the space where a person had been, and found only the specific emptiness of a person who had gone somewhere else before the first punch was thrown. Jennifer's momentum carried her through. She was a full step past where she'd started, off her original axis, the follow-through of the hook still completing itself against nothing. The crowd's roar stumbled. It didn't stop. It stumbled, caught itself, reassembled. But something had shifted in the room's molecular structure. Some assumption rearranging itself at the atomic level. The phones were still up. The drone was still overhead. But the sound was different. Not the sound of an expectation being fulfilled. The sound of a question being asked. Jennifer reset. Instantly. Too good to lose time to surprise. She came again, tighter this time. Less telegraphing, the adjustment of someone making a real-time technical correction. The right hand was the serious shot. Everything else was geometry, leading to the right hand, the feint, the level change, the body shot to bring the hands down, and then the right hand aimed at the specific point on his jaw that she'd put people down from before. Aimed there with everything behind it. Mark tilted his head, 1 inch, maybe less. The right hand went past his ear close enough that he felt the displaced air. Someone in the crowd made a sound that wasn't quite a word. 3 rows back, a woman grabbed the arm of the person next to her without looking at them. Jennifer threw again. Mark wasn't there. Again, not there. The footwork wasn't retreating, he wasn't giving ground, wasn't putting distance between them. He was occupying space that was never quite the space she was punching at. Like trying to hit a reflection. Like trying to catch smoke with your hands. The more she committed, the more precisely she missed, and each miss was costing her something. 20 seconds, longer than it sounds. Jennifer stopped. She was breathing harder than 20 seconds should require. Not tired. Burning fuel in frustration, which is different, which is worse. Her hands came down a half-inch. Stand still. It left her mouth before she chose to say it. The tell of someone who has stopped calculating and started reacting. I'm not going to make it easy for you. Flat. Informational. You want to throw for an hour, I'm here. But you'll tire long before I do, and we both know it. She heard it, the truth in it, the patience of it, and the part of Jennifer Williams that had been walking herself to the edge of this specific cliff for 2 years of slow decline, the fights she'd lost. The numbers dropping. The morning she'd looked at her own banner and felt the distance between the woman on it and the woman under it. That part took the patience as an insult. Because the patience assumed she couldn't reach him. Because the patience was correct. She stopped being a champion. It happened between one breath and the next. The technical apparatus, the geometry, the sequencing, the 15 years of precise and expensive training, all of it went offline, and what replaced it was something older and simpler and much, much more dangerous to herself. She came at him the way a person comes at something when they've stopped caring about the cost. All of it, no selection, no architecture, just the forward force of someone who needed to land something, anything, to change what was happening to them. And in all of that forward chaos, throwing everything, her elbow. On the way back from a missed hook, the elbow swung wide on the return, and it caught the ridge of Mark's left eyebrow. Not a punch, not a designed strike. The accidental consequence of a flailing recovery. It wouldn't have registered in any formal scoring system, wouldn't have slowed a professional down for a single step. But skin over the brow is thin, and the eyebrow split, and blood came. Mark felt it, warm, then wet, then the specific sensation of red at the corner of his eye. One drop, and the door moved, not open, not yet. But the vibration he'd felt for 9 days, the quiet persistence of the thing on the other side, became something else in that instant. Became a pressure, an insistence. Because blood had always been the signal, not by choice, not by design. Just the deep wiring of 11 years in programs he couldn't name, where blood was the line between before and what happened after, and his body, beneath all 9 years of deliberate ordinary life, remembered. The world changed. Not dramatically. From the outside, from 62,000 live stream viewers, watching on their phones and tablets in living rooms across the country, nothing visible had changed. Mark hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, hadn't changed expression, but the world went slow in the specific way it had always gone slow when the door opened. Slow and bright and very, very precise. He could see Jennifer's next movement before she committed to it. Could see her weight distribution, the slight over-rotation that had resulted from the elbow swing, the quarter-second of genuine surprise in her face that she was working to neutralize. He could see 4 different routes to 4 different outcomes, each one laid out in his mind like roads on a map, clearly marked, easily accessible, and from somewhere behind the door, a voice that was absolutely his own, younger, flatter, the voice that had belonged to the man in the photograph. With the ancient eyes said, "There you are. I knew you'd come back." His hand moved. It caught Jennifer's wrist mid-recovery from the elbow swing. Not a grab, not a clutch. The way you take hold of a doorknob, total, casual, without effort, because the effort isn't in the grip. The effort had already happened, 9 years ago, when he decided who he was going to be. Jennifer pulled. The wrist stayed. She twisted against it. Her shoulder engaged, her core rotated. She used her whole body against the one hand holding her. The wrist stayed. For the first time in her adult life, Jennifer Williams was completely stopped. Not outmatched in the sense of being outpunched or outmaneuvered. Stopped, like a wall had appeared. Like physics had made a decision that didn't involve her preferences. She looked at him, and what she saw in his eyes was not anger, was not satisfaction, was not the expression of a man winning something. It was the absence of expression. The flatness. The eyes from the photograph, the ones that had looked at the camera, as though the camera owed them something. They were here, now, in this room, looking at her from 9 inches away, and they were telling her a true thing about the nature of what she'd been standing across from this whole time. Her free hand stopped moving. Her body stopped fighting the grip. Some animal part of her, the part that functioned below language, had received the information and gone very, very still. Mark's other hand came back. Loaded. The front 3 rows saw where it was going. Understood in the collective instant of a crowd that had gotten exactly what it came for, that they were about to see something they hadn't fully thought through wanting to see. The specific horror of a fulfilled wish. The room dropped into a silence so complete that the drone's hum was suddenly audible. George White, off to the side with his microphone, had his mouth open and nothing coming out of it. 40 rows of people who had made signs and bought shirts and driven across Portland to watch this, who had chosen sides and placed their bets and decided what kind of story this was. All of them still. All of them waiting. In the deepest part of where Mark Anderson had gone behind the open door, in the cold flat place where the younger voice lived, the geometry was perfect. The endpoint was obvious. His body already knew. Was already in the process of doing the thing his body had always known how to do in rooms like this one. And then, Mark, one word, Brian, front row center, standing on the chair where he'd promised to stand. His voice cracked on the single syllable not broken. Cracked, the way something cracks when it's being used beyond its comfortable range because the situation requires it. Not loud enough to fill the room. Loud enough to go through everything else in the room like light through water. Reaching the specific frequency Mark Anderson was tuned to at every level he operated on. Mark, look at me. I'm right here. The loaded hand hung in the air. Below the door, the younger voice said, "Finish it. You're right there. It's already done." And Brian Thompson, 18 years old, on a folding chair in the front row of a room that had gone silent enough to hear it drone, was not running, was not covering his face, was not looking anywhere except directly at his brother, because he had said he would be here, and he was here, and that was the whole thing. That was the only thing he had to offer, and he was offering it completely. His eyes were wet. His chin was level. He was terrified and he was not moving. And what Mark saw in those eyes was not the fear of someone afraid of what he might do. It was the fear of someone watching, in real time, whether they were about to lose the last person they had left. The same math Brian had done on a kitchen chair at 1 a.m. The same math that had brought him to this folding chair. The math of a person who has calculated exactly what is at stake and has decided to be the variable that changes the outcome even if the calculation is wrong. I'm right here. Come back to me. The door fought. That was the true thing. The thing none of the 62,000 people watching would ever fully understand. It wasn't easy. The younger voice in the cold flat place was not politely stepping aside. 9 years of a welded door does not open easily, but the thing on the other side doesn't release easily either. And what happened in the next 3 seconds was not graceful. It was not the simple triumph of love over instinct. It was a man climbing, hand over hand, up out of something that had gravity. 1 second, the loaded hand still in the air. 2 seconds, something moving in Mark's face not visible on the live stream cameras. Visible to the 3 people in the front row close enough to see it, something shifting below the surface like tectonic plates, slow and enormous and irreversible. 3 seconds. He opened his hand. The fingers spread, released the grip on Jennifer's wrist. He stepped back 1 full step, deliberate, the step of someone returning to their body from somewhere far away. He brought the loaded hand down. Not quickly, carefully, the way you set something fragile on a high shelf. Jennifer stumbled back 2 steps, cradling her wrist against her chest, not because it was injured, because it was the hand that had just been held completely and then given back to her, and she needed a moment to understand that it was hers again. She looked at Mark, and the champion's eyes, the flat professional composure she'd built over 15 years like a seawall, was completely gone. What was in her face now was raw and unorganized and entirely human, the expression of someone who has understood, in a single moment, the exact weight of what just happened, what could have happened, what didn't. She had been 3 seconds and 1 open hand from the end of something she'd never find her way back from. and he had chosen not to. Mark wiped the blood from his eyebrow with the back of his wrist. It smeared across his temple. He didn't notice. He was looking at Brian. "Only I'm here, bud." His voice came out rough, raw at the edges. It carried in the silence to every corner of the room. 62,000 people in their living rooms heard it. 200 people in this building heard it. "I'm okay. I'm here." Brian got down from the chair. He walked out onto the mat, past George White, who didn't move to stop him, past Ryan, who had lowered his phone to his lap, past the cameras and the drone and the 177 people who had come to see a maintenance worker embarrass himself. Nobody stopped him. Nobody was capable of stopping him, because the room had just experienced something that had evacuated its ability to enforce any rule that wasn't connected to this. He reached his brother and put his arms around him, the way you hold on to something you nearly lost, which means with your whole body, with everything you have. Mark dropped to one knee on the mat, put his bloody face against his brother's shoulder, and held on. The gym, the whole loud, sign-waving, t-shirt wearing, live stream loading gym, did not make a sound, because they had come to see a fight, and they had seen something else entirely, and they had seen something stuyvesant, and the something else had reached into the part of them that existed before they'd learned to be entertained by other people's pain, and it had found something in there that recognized what it was watching. They had watched a man arrive at the exact worst version of himself. Everyone in the room had seen it happening, had felt the temperature drop, had felt the particular animal recognition of a predator at full capacity. And then they had watched a young man's voice reach into that and pull his brother back. And they had watched the pull work. There was a woman in the 7th row who was crying without knowing when she'd started. A man near the east wall had his hand pressed flat against his sternum, pressing on something he couldn't name. Ryan Robinson had his phone down in his lap, and his face was doing something it had never done before in 19 years of Ryan Robinson's face existing. Jennifer Williams stood alone in the center of her own floor. She had wanted to feel like the strongest person in the room again. She had chosen the quietest person she could find and tried to build herself back up from the bricks of his dignity. And she was standing 6 feet away from the most powerful thing she had ever witnessed in her life. And it hadn't been a punch, and it hadn't been a hold, and it hadn't been anything she had a name for in 15 years of competitive fighting. It had been an open hand. It had been the choice to open it. Something in her chest that had been load-bearing for a very long time, a wall she'd built so early and maintained so completely that she'd stopped, knowing it was a wall, and just thought it was the shape of her cracked straight down the center. George White was on his phone in the corner, mouthing words at his camera operator, pointing at the live stream counter, which had passed 150,000 and was still moving. He had come here to sell a fight and had accidentally broadcast something real and was too busy doing the math on it to understand what he was standing next to. Laura Clark appeared from somewhere near the entrance and crossed to the mat. She took Mark's face in both hands and tilted it toward the light, assessing the eyebrow with the clinical efficiency of someone who had been a nurse for 15 years and was using that fact to hold herself together right now. 4 stitches minimum. Maybe 5. Don't argue with me. Her hands were not quite steady. I'm not arguing. Mark let her look. Let her hands do their job. I saw the door open. She kept her voice low. For him, I was standing back there and I saw it happen. I know, and I saw him close it. Her eyes went to Brian, who was still close, one hand wrapped in the back of his brother's shirt, not quite ready to let go of the grip. How close? Mark looked at his brother. Closer than I'd like to say out loud. Laura pressed her lips together and nodded once and kept her hands on his face. It was the moment they would have left, Mark turning toward the maintenance door, the one that belonged to him, Brian following, Laura with her arm through Mark's, all of them gone through the door and out to the parking lot and away from whatever this had been, except a voice stopped them. Small, from the center of the floor. Nothing like the voice that had commanded this room 2 hours ago. Wait. Mark stopped, turned, Jennifer Williams had her gloves off. She'd pulled them with her teeth, one and then the other, the way fighters do, when their hands are shaking too much for the regular method. She was holding her own wrist, not because it was damaged, but because she needed something to hold. And her face, the one on the banner, the face that had always known exactly what to do next, was completely undone. "I need to say something," Jennifer said. Her voice was unsteady, the way a voice is unsteady, when someone has decided to say the true thing before they can stop themselves. "I need to say it now. Because if I wait, I won't. I know myself well enough to know that. The people along the walls who had been leaving weren't leaving anymore. You had my wrist." She said it directly to Mark. No performance in it, no room management. Just the fact, laid flat. Everyone in this building saw it. You had my wrist, and your other hand was loaded, and there was nothing I could have done. In my entire life, in 15 years of training, I have never once been in a position where there was absolutely nothing I could do. She stopped, took a breath that was more effort than a breath should be, and then you let go. Her eyes moved. "Found Brian. I need to say this to you most." She took 3 steps toward him. The distance between a champion and the person she'd decided to make small 9 days ago, closing to nothing. Her voice dropped. "What I said to you on Tuesday, about your punch, about your brother. I said it in front of 40 people to make them laugh. You hadn't done a single thing wrong. You were just in the corner, doing something you cared about. And I decided to use you because I thought you wouldn't push back." Her jaw worked. "That is the worst thing I know about myself. And I did it in front of cameras. So I'm doing this in front of cameras too." She was crying, openly, without trying to stop it or redirect it or make it look like something more controlled. Jennifer Williams, who had built an entire self on the premise that she would never be the one who showed the crack, was standing in the middle of her gym showing every part of it. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." The room held the words. Nobody moved. Brian looked at his brother. The question in the look was quiet and complete. "Your call." Mark's answer was quieter. "Yours. Whatever you do here is right." Brian turned back to Jennifer. He looked at her for a moment with those young, clear eyes that had been doing the hard math all week. "My parents died," he said. "Both of them. A few years apart." Jennifer's breath went out of her. "And Mark's the only one I've got left." He paused, not for effect, just because the next part needed its own space. "When you were laughing at him Tuesday, I got scared, because I thought maybe I'd gotten him wrong all this time. Maybe he was the wrong kind of quiet. And if he was, then I didn't have anybody." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. Then he said when, and I got more scared, but a different kind. Jennifer didn't speak. She was taking every word, had earned every word, knew it. "You almost made him turn into someone he promised never to be," Brian said, "in front of 200 people and 60,000 on a screen. That's what you almost did." A pause. "But he didn't. He came back. He came back because of me, which is the best thing that's ever happened in my life, and also the most terrifying." He squared his shoulders. "I'm not going to be mean to you back. Because my mom used to say, you can't build something real on top of someone else's wreckage. And if I'm mean to you right now, then I'm just doing the same thing you did." He stuck his hand out. The simple gesture, clean and unambiguous. "I forgive you, but you have to actually be different now. Not just tonight. After tonight, when nobody's watching, that's the part that counts." Jennifer Williams looked at the hand of a young man who had every reason to walk away and had chosen not to. She sank to her knees on the mat, not performed, not staged. The descent of someone whose legs have decided that standing is currently more than they can manage. She took Brian's hand, both of hers, and she held it. "Deal," she managed. "Second half is mine. I swear it." Somewhere in the 7th row, the woman who had started crying without knowing it was still crying. The man near the east wall hadn't moved his hand from his chest. Ryan Robinson had set his phone on the seat next to him, completely screen down, which was perhaps the most significant gesture anyone in the room had made all evening. George White's livestream counter read 240,000. George was pacing near the entrance, phone to his ear, saying the words "You're watching this," right in the particular high-pitched register of a man who has stumbled into something vastly larger than he built the container for. Mark came across the floor. He crouched down beside his brother and the kneeling champion, the three of them at eye level for a moment in the middle of the big empty room, and he spoke quietly. For the three of them, not for the room. You want to know why I said when? Not a question, a delivery. The thing he'd been carrying since Tuesday finally set down where it belonged. You kept asking yourself, I could see it all week. Why didn't he just walk? Here's why. He looked at Brian, then back at Jennifer. Walking away, that's easy. I've walked away from harder things than you 1,000 times. That is not strength. That is Tuesday. And hitting you. He paused. Let the truth of the next part arrive before he said it. Hitting you would have been easier. You have no idea how easy. And some part of me, the part that was down in that place tonight, wanted to. That part doesn't fully go away. Maybe it never does. His jaw tightened, but my brother was watching. And if I walk, he learns that the world can do whatever it wants to the people you love, and the right response is to absorb it quietly and sweep up. And if I hurt you, he stopped. He learns that the answer to cruelty is to becomes something worse than the cruel thing. Jennifer was listening with the entirety of herself. No processing happening anywhere that wasn't aimed at these words. I needed a third way, Mark said. I needed him to see that a person can be strong enough to end something and choose not to. That the choosing is where the strength actually lives. Not in the ending. He shook his head slowly. I didn't know if I could do it. I'm going to be honest with you, 20 seconds ago. I wasn't sure I did. If he hadn't called out, he didn't finish it, didn't need to. He stood, and he offered Jennifer his hand, the same hand, the one that had held her wrist and then opened, offered flat, palm up. You're talented, Mark said. You're one of the most technically precise fighters I've stood across from. That was never your problem. He held her eyes. Your problem is that you thought being strong meant nobody could ever make you feel small. But that's got it backwards. Being strong isn't about what you can do to people weaker. It's about what you choose not to do when you easily could. He glanced at Brian. Everybody here just watched me almost fail at that. Watched a 23-year-old save me. So don't kneel there thinking I'm a better version of the same thing. I'm not. I'm a person who's terrified of what he is, doing his best not to be it. One day at a time, same as you can be if you want it. Jennifer took his hand. He pulled her up. They stood on level ground, two people who had seen each other's worst, and it was such a different thing than anyone in the building had paid to see. No winner's arm raised, no loser on the ground, just two people standing up straight. Thank you, Jennifer said, barely above a whisper, for stopping, and for not letting me off the hook either. Both of those at the same time. She paused. How do you do both of those at the same time? You thank him. Mark nodded at Brian. I just showed up. He did the hard part. On the live stream, that sentence was already being clipped. Would be captured and captioned and sent across the country in the next 20 minutes. Would be the thing half the internet woke up to on Sunday morning. I just showed up. He did the hard part. And it would mean 100 different things to 100 different people. And none of those meanings would be quite the same as what it had meant in this room. But some of them would be close enough to matter. Laura got them out within 10 minutes, with the efficiency of someone who had been planning the exit route since she'd arrived, steering Mark by the arm toward the door. One hand on Brian's shoulder, her professional effect firmly in place now that there was a task. Hospital, she said. Now, I'm not asking. It's a scratch. It's 4 stitches and you're getting them, and Brian and I are going to sit in the waiting room and eat whatever the vending machine offers, and that is the complete plan. Her voice cracked on the last word, just once. Then she had it back. Jennifer walked them to the front door because she couldn't let them go out into the crowd, alone, and she didn't examine why. The news vans were in the parking lot, 2 of them, lights already up. Reporters assembling themselves into professionalism in real time. People who'd been outside the whole evening shouted when the door opened. Someone called Mark's name like he was famous, which he was, which he didn't know yet. Mark didn't answer any of it. He got Brian into the truck and came around to the driver's side. and only then, hand on the door, looked back once at the building. Jennifer was standing under the banner, her own face 6 meters above her, certain and enormous and 2 years old, and the actual woman underneath it was small and wrung out and irrevocably changed, holding her own gloves against her chest, watching a maintenance truck about to pull away. Mark could see, even across the parking lot, that she was going to have to spend a very long time becoming someone who deserved to stand under that face. That it was going to be the hardest work of her life, harder than any regional, harder than any belt. The kind of work that doesn't have a scoreboard. He raised one hand. Not a wave, an acknowledgement, the specific gesture of someone saying, "You can do it. It's going to be hard and you can do it, and no one is coming to do it for you." Jennifer raised hers back. Mark got in the truck. The heater took its time. The parking lot lights washed through the windshield, and the crowd noise faded as they pulled onto the street, and Portland at night received them back into its ordinary self, the wet roads, the traffic signals, the people on sidewalks who didn't know anything unusual had happened this evening, and whose lives were entirely unchanged by it. Brian was quiet for 4 blocks. Then Mark. "Yeah, when your eyes went away back there." He was looking straight ahead. "The flat thing. Were you scared?" Mark drove. Let a light turn green before answering. "Yeah." "Of her?" "No." He looked at his brother briefly, then back at the road. "Of me. I'm always a little scared of me. That's sort of the whole architecture." He kept his hands easy on the wheel. "The day I stop being scared of what I could do is the day I actually start becoming it. The fear isn't the weakness. The fear is the guardrail. You remember that anyone ever tells you they're not afraid of themselves, you pay attention to that person." Brian was quiet again, processing. "I wasn't scared of you," he said finally. "I want to be clear about that. When I yelled, I wasn't scared you'd hurt me. I knew you wouldn't. I was scared you'd hurt you." He turned in his seat. "I was scared you'd do something, and then you'd have to be the man in the photograph for the rest of your life. Even though she started it, even though the whole room was wrong, it would still feel like yours, and you'd carry it forever." He looked at his hands. "So I wasn't saving her. I was saving you. That's the only reason I yelled." Mark pulled the truck over, not at a light, not at a stop sign, just over. The shoulder of a wet Portland street under a sodium streetlight, the engine idling, the heater finally beginning to do its job. He sat with both hands on the wheel for a moment. Then he turned and pulled his brother across the bench seat and held on the way you hold. Something you understand the value of only after you come very close to losing it. "What?" Brian said, muffled. "What did I do?" "Nothing." Mark's voice wasn't working the way it normally worked. "You did everything. You've been doing everything. For every day of this whole year. And before it, and you've been doing it without I've never said it." He held on. "You saved me. Not just tonight. You've been saving me every single day since we lost them. You're the reason there's still a me to save." Brian didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, into his brother's shoulder, "I love you. I love you too. More than anything in this whole world." More than. He stopped. His throat was doing something that made complete sentences difficult, and he didn't fight it. More. In the back seat, Laura Clark had stopped trying to hold herself together and was crying quietly into her sleeve and was extremely committed to the position that neither of them would ever know. After a while, Mark let go, wiped his face, put the truck back in drive, pulled off the shoulder. They went on toward the hospital and the vending machine and the 4 stitches and the rest of the life that was waiting for them on the other side of tonight. The video had a name by Sunday morning. Someone had taken the 30 seconds of Mark giving all the credit to his brother and titled it simply, "The Strongest Man in the Room." It spread the way true things, spread not because anyone pushed it, but because something in it was recognized, again and again, by people who had been looking for a name for something they already knew. 11 million views by Monday. Mark found out from Brian over cereal. He watched 30 seconds of it with the sound low, and then set the phone face down and drank his coffee. 11 million people, he said, had watched him almost make a catastrophic mistake, and then watched his brother pull him back. and this was apparently the most hopeful thing the internet had seen in recent memory. He laughed, not a big laugh, a short, surprised one, and told Brian to eat his cereal because fame didn't do anyone's coursework. Edward Harris called again. Mark declined everything Harris offered again, with the same patient firmness, and went back to the maintenance route and the faucets and the boilers and the 340 pickup. George White called 4 times over the following week, with escalating numbers. Mark's final response was delivered in a tone that George found more persuasive than any argument, and George did not call a 5th time. 6 months passed. The banner came down on a Thursday morning in April. Jennifer took it down herself, using the ladder from the equipment closet, coming back. Up it wrong the first time, and having to reposition, which was fine. She didn't need anyone to help. She folded it and put it in the recycling bin at the back of the parking lot and went back inside. For 2 weeks there was nothing on the wall where it had been, just the paint, slightly brighter, in a rectangle where the banner had blocked the light. Then one Wednesday evening, she brought in a piece of reclaimed oak she'd worked on in her garage, and Ryan helped her mount it, and it said in letters she'd burned in herself, "The strongest thing you learn here is when not to." She taught differently now. It was hard to describe to someone who hadn't been in the gym before, but Ryan tried once. He said it was like she'd stopped performing the class and started being in it. She still corrected. She corrected more, actually, and with more specificity. But she got down to eye level to do it. She asked questions before she gave answers. When a beginner threw a bad punch, she went through it piece by piece, with the patience of someone who remembered what it cost to be shown up in front of a room. Sometimes the old reflex came. It always came. That was the true thing she'd learned. It didn't stop coming. In April, she was mid-class with a nervous 40-year-old man who joined after his wife had encouraged him for 2 years, and he was still apologizing with his body for taking up space in the room. She felt the reflex arrive, the easy laugh, the shortcut to making the room relax at someone else's expense. She felt it fully and completely. She let it pass. That evening, the man stayed after class for 10 extra minutes of work on his lead hand. He left smiling with the specific smile of someone who has surprised themselves. She called it progress, incremental, real. The harder moment came in May. A woman in the evening class knew a student, bright, fast hands, carrying something difficult that Jennifer recognized in the body language. Before she recognized it anywhere else, Jennifer was correcting her footwork and felt the old machinery engage, the precision of the criticism calibrated just slightly past instructive, just slightly into the register that establishes hierarchy, and she didn't catch it in time. The woman's face changed, just briefly, and then was fine again, the practiced fine of someone who knows how to rearrange quickly. Jennifer saw it. The woman went home. Jennifer stayed. The next morning, she was at the gym when it opened, before any class, and she called the woman and said, "I want to talk to you about something I did yesterday that I'm not proud of." The woman came in at noon. They sat in Jennifer's office with the lights on for once. And Jennifer said the things that were true, which were that she had spent a very long time using precision as a weapon and calling it high standards, and that she was working on the difference, and that what she'd done yesterday was the old version showing through, and that the woman deserved to know that it wasn't about her. The woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." Then she said, "I'll come back Tuesday." She came back Tuesday. Saying sorry, Jennifer had learned, was the first half. The second half was waking up on a Wednesday and doing the thing you failed at on Tuesday, and then waking up on Thursday, not because someone was watching, not because the live stream was running, just because it was right, and right didn't take a break on the days nobody was watching. This was the part that didn't make the clip, the part that never would. Brian Thompson tested for his intermediate belt on a Saturday in late September. The gym was full of the ordinary kind of full families in folding chairs, a card table with sheet cake, someone's grandmother in the third row already positioned to be the loudest applause in the room before anything had happened. Mark sat in the front row. He'd cleaned the gym that morning, same as every morning. changed into a clean shirt, come back and sat down. Laura was beside him with her phone out, already slightly wet around the eyes because Laura had decided 6 months ago to stop apologizing for being emotional at meaningful events and had not looked back. Jennifer ran the test. She called students up, one at a time. And her manner with them was not the manner of the banner woman. And this was the highest compliment the universe could have paid to the change in her without saying a word about it. Brian was called last. He went through the form clean. 6 months of 3 afternoons a week, built into the body the way things get built, when the learning is patient and the teaching is honest. He was still 23, still young, still had the particular quality of someone who hasn't yet arrived at the full version of themselves. But the groundedness was there. The quiet, something settling into place that would be with him for the rest of his life. He held the final position, breathing, focused. Then he turned before Jennifer could speak, before the result was declared, and found his brother's face in the front row. The way they always found each other now, the language they'd developed without naming it. Mark nodded. Once. Nothing about the test in it. Everything about the year in it. I see you. I see exactly who you're becoming. I've got you. Brian turned back. Jennifer. Jennifer Williams looked at the young man who had stood on a folding chair in a room full of noise and held his brother to himself, with nothing but his voice. That, she said, and her voice only almost held, is a pass. You earned it, Brian. The grandmother in the third row started the applause. As promised, Brian ran. Mark stood. They met in the middle of the gym floor and Brian's face was all the way open, the biggest uncomplicated joy of the entire year on it. Unguarded, real. I did it. You did the whole thing. Mark held his brother by the shoulders. I watched every second. Did I do it right? The stopping part. Jennifer says you can't test it. You can only test the punches. But did I? You did it right, Mark said. You've been doing it right since the day I met you. You did it right in a room full of people 6 months ago, when you called me back from the worst thing I'd almost become. He held his brother's eyes. You're better at the stopping part than I am. You came into it that way. I'm just trying to catch up. Across the gym, under the burned oak sign, Jennifer Williams stood beside Ryan Robinson and watched a man give his brother the only thing that had ever actually mattered to him, which was the truth, in front of everyone, without performing it. Ryan, without looking away from the floor, you're different, coach. Jennifer watched the two brothers in the middle of the ordinary joy of the gym. Yeah, better different. She thought about the caller in October, the woman in May, the Tuesday she'd caught the reflex and the Wednesday she'd made the call. Working on it, she said, every day. You okay? She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Yeah, she said, and meant it all the way down. For perhaps the first time in her adult life she meant it all the way to the bottom. Yeah, Ryan. I'm okay. Mark locked the gym at 9:17 that night. His job, his keys, same as every night. He stood alone in the dark for a moment. The corner where Brian had thrown a bad punch 7 months ago, the wall where the banner used to live, the sign that said what it said in letters hand-burned from oak, the mat he'd mopped 10,000 times. He thought about a promise, made at a hospital bed. Promise me he never meets that man. Promise me our Brian never has to be afraid of you. He'd come so close. One hand opened, one voice in the right second, and the promise still kept, by the thinnest of margins, by a 23-year-old who'd decided to be a guardrail, but kept. He turned off the light, walked out. The door latched behind him, the hinge he'd repaired in August, the one that needed a firm second pull. He knew exactly how much. Brian was in the passenger seat, asleep already, his new belt folded in his lap, one ear still in a headphone. The parking lot was empty. The Portland night was the specific temperature of late September, which has the courtesy to feel like itself instead of pretending to be something else. Mark got in, looked at his brother, didn't start the engine right away. They thought the silence was weakness. The whole internet had decided that in the first 90 minutes, before any of them knew what they were watching, they'd thought the gray t-shirt and the work boots and the one flat word were the costume of a man who had nothing underneath one. What they couldn't see, what none of the 62,000 had been close enough to see, was that the silence had always been the load-bearing wall. That every ordinary day, every boiler check and faucet and 340 pickup had been the weight pressing against a door. That the strongest thing a person can carry is the thing they choose never to put down, even when putting it down would be so easy, even when the whole room is telling them to, even when some ancient part of them is saying, "There you are, I missed you, this is what you're for." Mark started the engine. He drove his brother home through the Portland dark, a maintenance worker, a brother, the strongest man 11 million people had ever seen, going back to a small quiet life he had chosen with both hands and would choose again without hesitation, because the whole world had it exactly backwards. They thought the power was in what you could do. He knew, had paid to know, had spent his whole life paying to know that the power was in what you held still.